I'm Leah Albaugh, and I'm presenting today on a DIS 2020 paper written by myself, Scott Hudson, Linning Yao, and Laura Devendorf. This work is about possibilities for alternate values in digital fabrication, and particularly about recognizing shifting roles for digital mediation in fabrication systems. For some background, weaving is a process of interlacing threads. The specific pattern of how the particular sets of warps and weft threads pass over and under each other is what determines the visual and tactile patterns of the fabric. A jacquard hand loom like this is a piece of weaving equipment that is in one sense very automatic and in another sense very manual. It does do the work of remembering the pattern, which can be quite complex. In the case of this loom, there are 1,320 threads for every row. But it does not do the work of physically inserting the weft thread and compacting it, as you see in this video. These are typically used as production equipment, in the sense that the weaving pattern is designed in advance. While the weaver must perform skilled labor for the duration of the weaving process, that process would, ideally, be as deterministic as possible. Indeed, the loom control software itself is basically a utility for sending static Boolean data to the machine. It's assumed that the weaver will have produced a pattern in another piece of software entirely, in a process disconnected from the loom itself. That disconnect and the weaver's necessary presence and labor present opportunities for exploration. What if we made design tools that integrated directly into a jacquard weaving process? Indeed, what does a design tool even look like in this context? There are as many processes for doing textile work as there are weavers. How do we make room for that multiplicity in personal taste, approaches, and experiences? How might we give both weaver and loom additional roles as active participants in the process of weaving? We might call this deliberately underdetermining the weaving job, predetermining some aspects of the process and outcome, but not all, and leaving space for exploration, play, or even challenge. On the software side, we reverse engineered the control protocol to this TC2 jacquard loom so that we could track weaving progress and send data on a line-by-line basis. This was wrapped as a library for processing in order to quickly connect it to other creative coding modalities such as computer vision and Arduinos. We use this as a platform to prototype a variety of interactive sketches incorporating underdetermination, and refined 3 of them for full weaving sessions. The first of those arose out of that editing disconnect, the problem of planning fabrics in a virtual space away from the loom itself. In response, we looked to interactive fabrication systems, which often situate the planning and prototyping processes directly on the machine or on the material in progress. At the same time, I had observed Sandra Rotonen, the weaver in residence in the Unstable Design Lab where this work took place, using abstract paper cutouts as a way of quickly iterating on possible weaving combinations. This technique's history also includes the work of Henri Matisse, whose cutout works allowed him to design dynamically at scale. So this sketch allowed me to interactively compose an abstract pattern at real scale by arranging paper cutouts directly on the unwoven part of the fabric. These cutouts and the voids between them were interpreted into a family of related weaving patterns. However, it turned out that the time it took to weave enough fabric for the composition to be clear meant that each design move was isolated and started to feel, well, overdetermined. In a second version of this sketch, I added the ability to remix. New inputs could be overlaid or subtracted from the current composition, and I could jump the cursor around to repeat or reverse through sections of the composition. In other words, I introduced a greater layer of digital intervention between the cutouts and the weaving. Because I could jump around the composition, what was on screen was no longer a straightforward preview of the weaving, but more of a map of the current possibility space. And the weaving itself acted as kind of a record of snippets of this intermediate space. That idea of weaving as record is at the heart of the second sketch in this work, which is this slit scan self-portrait. Slit scanning is a photographic technique in which a scene is sampled through a narrow moving window over time. While slit scanning has its roots in analog process, it's a very digital appeal as well. The process of transcoding one kind of data to another. In this case, time becomes mapped as a physical axis. So the second sketch is a woven temporal self-portrait. Live video of the weaver's face is sampled each time a row is woven to determine the pattern for the next row. In this way, the weaving process itself is illustrated in the output. As the weaver, that meant that my labor was no longer just to enact the fabric, but also to sit for a portrait. And this was a surprisingly athletic weaving to perform, and as the weaver, I was torn between trying to perform perfectly versus pushing myself to embrace a more chaotic outcome. Seizing on this aspect of performance, our third sketch added spectatorship. This one is inspired by a thread in game design research in which real-time asymmetric gameplay is mediated through an online viewer-spectator relationship, particularly through the popular live streaming website Twitch. So I live streamed the weaving process on Twitch and invited viewers to alter the weaving pattern in real time by changing individual interlacement points, represented on their screens as pixels. The weaver's role in this sketch is actually quite alienated. On Twitch, the audience has near instantaneous text communication amongst themselves through the chat, but the streamer's actions are asymmetric and might have 20 or so seconds of lag. Without looking at the chat screen, it was difficult for me to tell whether anyone was even watching, and without a co-host, it felt almost entirely like I was talking to myself. This sketch also plays on the cultural trappings of Twitch as an unruly and high-octane place. It's typically centered on fast-paced video gameplay, in pretty stark opposition to the necessary slow and methodical pace of weaving. Interestingly, that aspect went fairly unremarked upon. The viewers commented more on the seeming contrast between their own very remote and trivial-seeming clicks and the almost magical production of a permanent physical artifact. Which is not to say that the unruliness didn't come through. Here's what the pattern looked like in the brief interlude between the viewers starting to do some very gentle hacking by scripting their clicks, and when one of them accidentally crashed the server. This is probably the highlight of the stream, and in retrospect as the sketch designer, I really should have supported this kind of algorithmic play more directly, or at least made it more straightforward with less crashing risk. My role as a weaver, though, was primarily a conduit for the viewer's experience. This, combined with the rigor of outward performance, made what was arguably the least predetermined of the three sketches feel the most like being a cog in a machine. But, as a host for my friends, this is not necessarily in a bad way. So was this a positive experience? I'm not sure that's necessarily a productive question. Within HCI, we've seen a broadening of digital fabrication from an artifact-centric approach to include work which centers a real-time experience of making. However, interactive fabrication systems have especially been positioned as prototyping or learning tools. They often de-emphasize specific object outcomes, leaning towards low fidelity or sketch-like outputs, and place the emphasis instead on the knowledge gained through the experience of interacting. In an underdetermination framing, this artifact experience dichotomy is not so clear-cut. Indeed, because an interactive system is understood by the user as a sequence of outcomes, experience and artifact are necessarily intertwined. In such systems, it may be more illuminating to examine the shifting roles between system components and the logics which connect them. These logics can include the material, mechanical, structural constraints of fabrication, the digital or algorithmic processes which drive them, and personal associations and preferences of the weaver, either from a first-person perspective or otherwise. And in fact, in positioning myself as both the author of these systems and their users, perhaps you can think of as setting up a collaboration between past and future selves, I engage in a process that is actually very well established in weaving. The weavers in the audience may recognize this way of designing a system. In quick summary, it's saying that the resulting woven pattern is composed from both setup choices made before weaving begins, as well as a series of actions that the weaver takes during weaving, which can of course be improvisational. In this work, we position these histories, these analog computational approaches, as a basis for uniquely digital capabilities, such as computer vision or video capture or even internet spectatorship. With this lens, we can look to glitch and procedural art to inform ways that digital systems, partially specified or even in states of disarray, can mediate between experience and artifact and between user and material. Instead of thinking of the digital hand loom as a mere enabling technology, we consider it as a material opportunity, with affordances, associations, and roles of its own. As digital technologies are increasingly enmeshed with the physical world, fixed roles between machine systems, materiality, and craft processes must become flexible. We see these sketches as ways of opening up the framing of digital processes solely as production tools, primarily responsible for rendering deterministic precision, to also include the ways in which computation itself can underpin surprise and emergence. This is where I would take questions, but, feel free to reach out on Twitter, OX11EAEA, or through email, leah@cmu.edu. Thank you to my co-authors and my summer colleagues in the Unstable Design Lab, and thank you for watching. And scene. Perfect.